The universe was about to witness a technological revolution unlike anything it had ever seen, and humanity was just getting started. The diplomatic chamber was unlike any negotiation space in galactic history. Michael Thompson stood at the center, not as a conqueror, but as an architect of possibilities. The Zylaxian delegation looked beaten, not by military might, but by something far more profound, a complete reimagining of interstellar relations. Diplomatic protocols had become a battlefield, and humans had just demonstrated mastery of terrain no one else had even recognized existed. Captain Zora Liraak sat across the negotiation table, her 6 eyes moving with a mixture of confusion and reluctant respect. The Zylaxian military and diplomatic corps had been systematically dismantled, not through violence, but through a comprehensive deconstruction of their fundamental understanding of conflict, communication, and coexistence. "We're not here to conquer," Michael began, his voice calm and precise. "We're here to demonstrate a different approach to galactic interaction." The translation systems worked overtime, attempting to capture the nuanced layers of communication that went far beyond simple language. What Michael was offering was more than a diplomatic resolution. It was a complete paradigm shift in how civilizations could interact. Emily Watkins, seated beside Michael, had spent months preparing this moment. The psychological groundwork had been meticulously laid, creating conditions where the Zylaxians would be receptive to an approach that seemed impossible just months earlier. The proposal was revolutionary. Instead of traditional subjugation or conflict resolution, humans were offering a comprehensive partnership model. Economic integration, technological exchange, cultural dialogue, but with a fundamental difference. This wasn't about domination. It was about mutual growth. "Your civilization has technological capabilities we respect," Michael continued. "But technology is not about superiority. It's about potential." Rachel Gonzalez, the quantum systems engineer, began presenting a series of collaborative technological proposals. Each presentation was a masterpiece of diplomatic innovation. They weren't just offering technological exchange. They were demonstrating how human and Zylaxian technologies could create something entirely new when approached with genuine curiosity and respect. The Zylaxian delegation struggled to comprehend the approach. Every previous encounter with a developing civilization had followed a specific pattern: technological assessment, strategic evaluation, potential subjugation. Humans were presenting something entirely outside that framework. "We're not asking for submission," Emily explained during a critical moment of the negotiations. "We're offering collaboration." The psychological groundwork became clear. The subtle communication interventions, the carefully crafted information streams, the microscopic cultural adjustments, they had all been leading to this moment. The Zylaxians were not being forced into a decision. They were being guided to recognize a new possibility. Carlos Ramirez, representing the Military Strategic Division, presented a comprehensive security framework that was equally revolutionary. It wasn't about defensive capabilities or potential conflict scenarios. It was a model of mutual security that recognized the fundamental interconnectedness of advanced civilizations. "Conflict is a failure of imagination," he said, a statement that would become famous across multiple star systems. The negotiation wasn't a single moment, but a complex dance of communication, technological demonstration, and philosophical exploration. Humans were presenting themselves not as conquerors, not as victims, but as partners in a potential galactic evolution. Jessica Rodriguez, the lead xenotechnology specialist, began demonstrating collaborative technology prototypes. Each demonstration was a subtle masterpiece, showing how human and Zylaxian technological approaches could create solutions to challenges neither civilization could solve independently. By the negotiations' conclusion, something unprecedented had occurred. The Zylaxians weren't being defeated. They were being invited to reimagine their entire approach to galactic interaction. Captain Zora Liraak made a decision that would be studied by diplomatic historians for generations. Instead of resistance, she chose curiosity. Instead of conflict, she chose potential. "We accept your proposal," she finally stated, her voice carrying the weight of a civilization's transformation. Michael Thompson's smile was subtle. This wasn't a victory. This was an invitation to something entirely new. The galaxy watched and waited. Humanity had just redefined the very concept of first contact. The vacuum of space trembled with anticipation as the Zalaxian diplomatic vessel glided towards the human settlement. Its bioengineered hull shimmered with intricate patterns of bioluminescent technology, a testament to centuries of genetic and structural refinement. Captain Zara Liraak stood on the bridge, her multi-jointed fingers hovering over holographic control interfaces, radiating an air of supreme confidence that bordered on contempt. Epsilon 9 appeared on the main view screen, a seemingly insignificant colony nestled within a system that most advanced civilizations would have overlooked. The planet's surface was a patchwork of terraformed landscapes, industrial complexes, and what appeared to be rudimentary agricultural zones. To the Zylaxian eyes, it looked primitive, almost laughable. Preliminary scans complete, announced First Navigator Krell, his translucent membrane flickering with data streams. Human population, approximately 250,000. Technology level, pre-interstellar. Defensive capabilities, minimal. Captain Liraak's 6 eyes, each a complex mosaic of perception beyond human comprehension, narrowed with a mixture of disdain and calculated assessment. The Galactic Confederation had sent her on a mission of formal introduction and, more precisely, subtle subjugation. Humanity was to be informed of their place in the cosmic hierarchy, a task she had performed countless times across numerous star systems. What the Zalaxians didn't realize was that Epsilon 9 was far from a random colony. It was a carefully positioned outpost, selected for its strategic importance and populated by individuals who represented the most adaptive segment of human society. Every building, every infrastructure point had been designed with multiple contingencies in mind. The first communication attempt came from the human settlement. Instead of the expected diplomatic protocols or nervous transmissions, the message was startlingly direct. "Unidentified vessel, you are entering restricted space," a voice announced. Not a plea, not a warning, simply a statement of fact. The voice belonged to Catherine Martinez, the colony's defense coordinator, a veteran of multiple interstellar conflict simulations. Krell looked confused. "They're not requesting identification or asking about our intentions." Captain Liraak found herself unexpectedly intrigued. This was not the typical response of a supposedly primitive species. Her clawed hand gestured for a more detailed communication attempt. "This is Captain Zora Liraak of the Galactic Confederation." She transmitted, her universal translator converting her complex linguistic clicks into standard communication frequencies. "We come with diplomatic intentions to establish first contact and discuss your colony's integration into galactic structures." The response was immediate and unexpected. A series of mathematical sequences began streaming through their communication systems. Complex algorithms intertwined with what seemed like musical patterns, creating a transmission that was simultaneously a greeting, a test, and a subtle form of communication that defied standard diplomatic protocols. Catherine Martinez watched from the colony's primary communication center, a smile playing across her lips. The incoming alien vessel had no idea it was already being analyzed, decoded, and categorized by systems far more sophisticated than they could imagine. The Zylaxian crew began to feel an inexplicable sense of unease. Their scanning technologies, which had mapped countless civilizations, seemed to struggle with obtaining comprehensive data about the human settlement. Sensors would momentarily lock onto a structure, only to have the information dissolve into cryptic patterns. "Something is interfering with our scans," Krell reported, a tremor of uncertainty in his voice. Captain Liraak said nothing, her attention fixed on the planet below. Something about this human colony was different. The buildings seemed to shift subtly, their configurations not quite matching standard architectural records. The industrial zones pulsed with an energy signature that didn't conform to any known technological standard. What the Zalaxians perceived as weakness was actually a carefully constructed facade. Epsilon 9 was a proving ground, a strategic outpost designed to look ordinary, while concealing capabilities that would challenge everything the Galactic Confederation understood about technological development. First contact had begun, but the game was already far from what anyone expected. The research facility looked like organized chaos, a sprawling complex that defied conventional scientific architectural principles. Jessica Rodriguez moved between holographic displays, her movements creating cascading waves of data that transformed and reshaped themselves in real time. This was more than a research center. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of innovation. Captured Xylaxian technology lay disassembled across multiple workstations, where most scientists would approach alien technology with caution. Jessica's team saw an opportunity, a puzzle waiting to be completely reimagined. Each component was not just studied, but challenged, deconstructed, and reconstructed with a creativity that bordered on the miraculous. "We're not reverse engineering," Jessica explained to a group of visiting military strategists. "We're rewriting the fundamental understanding of technological development." Her primary team represented a cross-section of human potential that would have been impossible to predict just decades earlier. Marcus Williams, a quantum engineering specialist with a background in evolutionary biology, stood beside her. His neural interface allowed him to process complex technological schemas faster than most supercomputers could calculate. "Look at this," he said, manipulating a holographic representation of a Xylaxian energy conduit. The technology seemed to breathe under his touch, its molecular structure shifting and adapting in ways that defied traditional understanding of physics. What the Xylaxians didn't comprehend was humanity's fundamental approach to technology. Where most civilizations saw systems as fixed structures, humans viewed technology as a living, evolving organism. Each piece of equipment was a potential platform for transformation, not just a tool to be used. A young engineer named Rebecca Kim approached with a new prototype. What appeared to be a simple communication device was actually a complex adaptive system that could modify its own fundamental communication protocols in real time. Traditional alien scanning technologies would find it nearly impossible to track or understand. "We're creating technology that thinks," Marcus explained. "Not just artificial intelligence, but adaptive intelligence that can fundamentally change its own operational parameters based on environmental conditions." The military strategists watched in stunned silence. This wasn't just technological innovation. It was a complete reimagining of what technology could be. Jessica's team had already produced prototypes that would revolutionize multiple scientific disciplines. A medical adaptation module could potentially restructure its own nanoscale components to address unknown biological threats. A communication system could generate entirely new linguistic protocols on the fly, making traditional cryptography look like child's play. "Our advantage isn't in having the most advanced technology," Jessica told her team during a strategy meeting. "Our advantage is our ability to see beyond the technology itself. We don't just solve problems. We redefine what a solution can look like." The captured Xylaxian technologies were transformed beyond recognition. Energy systems that once required massive infrastructure were condensed into compact, adaptable units. Communication technologies that relied on complex biological interfaces were reimagined as flexible, programmable systems that could interface with virtually any known and unknown communication method. Marcus demonstrated a prototype that could interface with the Xylaxian communication network by essentially learning and mimicking its communication protocols in real time. It wasn't just translation. It was a complete linguistic and technological adaptation that happened faster than the original system could detect a change. "They're looking for a specific type of technological signature," he explained. "We're creating something that doesn't have a signature. We're becoming invisible by being infinitely adaptable." The military strategists began to understand what made humans truly dangerous. It wasn't raw technological power, but the ability to completely reimagine the very concept of technological development. Where other species saw limitations, humans saw opportunities for transformation. By the end of the week, Jessica's team had not just studied the Xylaxian technologies, they had completely transformed them into something entirely new. Prototypes that would have taken other civilizations decades to develop were being refined and tested within days. "Welcome to human innovation," Jessica said with a smile that was equal parts scientific excitement and strategic calculation. "We don't just adapt, we evolve." The universe was about to witness a technological revolution unlike anything it had ever seen. The communications center of Epsilon 9 Colony buzzed with an energy that defied traditional diplomatic protocols. Michael Thompson leaned back in his ergonomic chair, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to anticipate his movements before he could complete them. 20 years of military strategy, xenolinguistics, and psychological warfare had prepared him for precisely this moment. Around him, a team of specialists worked with an almost telepathic coordination. Elena Rodriguez, a quantum communication expert, analyzed the incoming Xylaxian transmissions with a precision that bordered on artistic deconstruction. To her left, James Chen manipulated complex algorithmic filters, stripping away layers of alien communication to reveal underlying patterns. "They think we're simple," Michael muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. His eyes tracked the intricate data streams that most would consider incomprehensible chaos. Each Xylaxian communication was a puzzle, and he was determined to understand every microscopic detail. The Xylaxian diplomatic transmission arrived, a carefully constructed message that had likely been successful in subduing countless other developing civilizations. It was a masterpiece of manipulative communication, designed to establish immediate hierarchical superiority. Most species would have been overwhelmed, perhaps even grateful for the apparent guidance. Michael Thompson saw it differently. "Break it down," he said softly to Elena. She nodded, her fingers already moving across quantum decryption interfaces. Lines of code transformed, twisted, revealing the hidden structures within the alien communication. What emerged was not just a diplomatic message, but a complex psychological manipulation tool. The Xylaxians had refined their communication into a weapon, a method of establishing psychological dominance that had worked across hundreds of star systems. They didn't just communicate, they conquered through language. But they had never encountered humans. James Chen's voice cut through the tension. "Got it. They're using nested linguistic triggers. Each phrase is designed to trigger specific neurological responses of submission in less developed species." Michael leaned forward, a predatory smile forming. "Let's have some fun." The response began as a seemingly innocent mathematical sequence, a universal language that any advanced civilization would understand. But embedded within those numbers were complex psychological countermeasures, linguistic viruses that would do to the Xylaxian communication what a precision surgical strike does to a complex infrastructure. Elena watched in fascination as the response took shape. It wasn't just a message. It was a comprehensive deconstruction of the entire Xylaxian diplomatic approach. The first layer appeared to be a straightforward mathematical proof, something that would initially impress the alien diplomats. But each subsequent layer peeled back another aspect of their communication strategy. Mathematical sequences began to reveal underlying logical fallacies in their diplomatic approach. Linguistic patterns exposed the manipulative structures hidden within their seemingly neutral communication. They used hierarchical communication models that assume automatic submission, Michael explained to his team. "We're going to show them that humanity doesn't play by those rules." The communication was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Where the Xylaxians expected submission, they would find analysis. Where they anticipated compliance, they would encounter strategic deconstruction. James Chen chuckled. "They have no idea what's coming." The response was transmitted. To the Xylaxian communication systems, it would appear as a complex but comprehensible message. But embedded within those transmissions were sophisticated counter-linguistic algorithms designed to do something unprecedented, Not just resist manipulation, but systematically expose the manipulation itself. In the communications center, the team worked with the precision of surgeons and the excitement of explorers charting unknown territories. This was more than a diplomatic exchange. This was first contact as a form of intellectual combat. Michael Thompson watched the transmission go out, knowing that somewhere on the Zylaxian vessel, diplomats would be experiencing something they had never encountered before. Confusion, uncertainty, the realization that their tried and true methods of conquest might not work. "Prepare the next layer," he said quietly. The game had only just begun. The first wave of Zylaxian assault vessels cut through the star system with predatory precision. Their bioengineered weapon platforms represented the pinnacle of galactic military technology, adaptive biomechanical systems that had subjugated countless civilizations. Each ship moved with a collective intelligence that had made the Zylaxian military a terror across multiple star systems. They didn't expect Carlos Ramirez. Lieutenant Ramirez stood in the primary defense coordination center, a network of holographic displays dancing around him like living extensions of his own consciousness. His team wasn't a traditional military unit. They were something entirely different. Veterans, scientists, strategists, and adaptive warfare specialists who had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. "Incoming wave," announced Sarah Chen, the tactical communication specialist. Her fingers moved across interfaces that seemed to anticipate threats before they fully materialized. 17 primary assault vessels, 3 support platforms, typical multi-vector attack pattern. Carlos's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Typical," he repeated, the word carrying a weight of profound understatement. The Zylaxian assault was a masterpiece of military engineering. Biomechanical weapon systems that could adapt to defensive protocols in microseconds. Energy weapons that could recalibrate their quantum signatures faster than most species could comprehend defensive maneuvers. They had conquered civilizations with less technological capability in a matter of hours. Epsilon 9 was different. The first defensive response came not as a traditional weapon system, but as a comprehensive environmental manipulation strategy. As the Zylaxian vessels entered the planetary defense zone, they encountered something impossible to predict. The very space around them began to change. Quantum field generators, carefully positioned across the colony's defensive perimeter, began to create localized spatial anomalies. Navigation systems found themselves receiving conflicting geographical data. Weapon targeting mechanisms suddenly encountered impossible geometric configurations. "They're trying to understand our defensive pattern," Carlos explained to his team. "We're going to make sure they can't." The colony's defensive systems were not just technological. They were a living, breathing ecosystem of adaptive warfare. Where traditional military units would have fixed defensive positions, Epsilon 9's defenses moved like liquid mercury. Defensive platforms could reconfigure themselves in milliseconds, presenting an ever-changing tactical landscape that defied standard military engagement protocols. Sarah Chen's communication intercept systems began to pick up Zylaxian internal transmissions. Confusion, uncertainty, the first hints of genuine fear. "Their collective intelligence is struggling," she reported. "They're encountering tactical scenarios that don't exist in their strategic databases." The first physical engagement happened almost too quickly to be comprehended. Zylaxian fighter squadrons found themselves navigating through spatial distortions that seemed to defy fundamental laws of physics. Weapon systems that could normally track and destroy targets with machine-like precision suddenly found their targeting systems compromised. Carlos watched the engagement with a clinical detachment. This wasn't just a battle. It was a comprehensive demonstration of human adaptive warfare. Small human strike teams moved with a fluidity that defied traditional military doctrine. They weren't just soldiers. They were living weapons systems. Each team member carried adaptive technology that could transform their entire operational capability in seconds. A communication specialist could become a frontline combatant. A medical officer could become an electronic warfare expert. The Xylaxian military command began to realize they were facing something entirely outside their comprehensive threat assessment models. "They're hunting us," one Xylaxian tactical officer transmitted in a moment of horrified realization. And he was correct. The human defensive teams weren't just defending. They were systematically dismantling the Xylaxian assault with a predatory precision that spoke to something far more fundamental. By the engagement's conclusion, 17 Xylaxian assault vessels had been neutralized. Not destroyed. Neutralized. Captured. Disabled. Transformed into intelligence-gathering platforms that would reveal even more about Xylaxian military capabilities. Carlos Ramirez looked at the tactical display, his expression unchanged. "First contact," he muttered, "is always the most interesting part." The galaxy would never be the same. 5 years after the first contact, the galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The human colony on Epsilon 9 was no longer just a settlement. It had become the epicenter of a radical reimagining of interstellar civilization. Captain Zora Liraak stood in the central research hub, watching as human and Xylaxian scientists worked side by side. What had begun as a potential conflict had evolved into the most significant collaborative scientific endeavor in galactic history. The initial fear and antagonism had given way to a profound mutual respect that transcended traditional boundaries of species and civilization. Michael Thompson, now the primary diplomatic liaison, moved through the complex with a quiet confidence. He had become more than a negotiator. He was an architect of a new type of interstellar relationship. The collaborative model they had developed was being studied by civilizations across multiple star systems. The technological exchanges had produced breakthroughs that defied previous scientific understanding. Medical technologies that could adapt to multiple biological systems. Communication protocols that could bridge seemingly incompatible linguistic and cultural barriers. Energy generation systems that approached near-perfect efficiency. Jessica Rodriguez oversaw the primary Xenotechnology Integration Center. Her team had become legendary, not for their military achievements, but for their ability to find collaborative solutions to challenges that had previously seemed insurmountable. "We're not just sharing technology," she would explain to visiting delegations. "We're creating a new language of innovation." The economic model they had developed was equally revolutionary. Instead of traditional resource extraction or territorial expansion, the new approach focused on mutual development. Xylaxian resource management techniques combined with human adaptive technologies created sustainable development models that could transform entire planetary ecosystems. Carlos Ramirez had transformed military strategy into a complex form of collaborative security. The new approach wasn't about preparing for conflict. It was about creating conditions that made conflict unnecessary. Defensive technologies were developed not as weapons, but as complex communication and problem-solving platforms. Emily Watkins continued her work in cross-cultural understanding, developing communication frameworks that allowed fundamentally different species to find common ground. Her research had become a new academic discipline, studied across multiple civilizations. The Galactic Confederation, once a rigid hierarchical system, had been fundamentally transformed. Humanity hadn't conquered. They had invited everyone to reimagine what collaboration could mean. Rachel Gonzalez's quantum communication research had produced technologies that allowed for unprecedented levels of information exchange. Complex ideas could now be transmitted with a nuance and depth that previous communication methods could never achieve. It wasn't just about sharing information. It was about sharing understanding. Daniel Kim's Technological Innovation Centers had become the most sought-after research facilities in known space. Young scientists from multiple species competed for positions, drawn by the promise of pushing beyond known technological boundaries. The human approach had revealed something profound about the nature of technological and cultural development. It wasn't about superiority. It was about potential. Every civilization had unique capabilities, unique perspectives that could contribute to a larger understanding. Captain Liraak reflected on the transformation. The Xylaxian civilization had been fundamentally changed, but not through conquest. They had been invited to see themselves differently, to understand that true strength wasn't about domination, but about collaboration. Michael Thompson watched the research complex, understanding that this was more than a diplomatic or technological achievement. This was a fundamental reimagining of what civilization could be. The collaborative model they had developed was spreading. Other species were beginning to see that there were alternatives to the traditional cycles of conflict and subjugation. Each new breakthrough was a challenge to old ways of thinking. "We're not just changing technology," Michael would often say. "We're changing the fundamental way civilizations understand themselves." As the sun set on Epsilon 9, casting long shadows across the research complex, it was clear that something extraordinary had happened. Humanity hadn't just made first contact. They had invited the entire galaxy to imagine a different future. The universe would never be the same again. It was about understanding. The research complex of Epsilon 9 pulsed with an energy that defied conventional scientific understanding. Daniel Kim stood at the epicenter of a technological transformation that would rewrite the fundamental principles of innovation. This was more than a research facility. It was a living laboratory where the boundaries between technology, biology, and pure imagination blurred into something entirely new. Captured Zylaxian technology lay disassembled across multiple workstations, each component treated not as a finished product, but as a beginning. Where most scientists would approach alien technology with reverence or caution, Daniel's team saw something else entirely: potential. "We don't reverse engineer," Daniel explained to a group of visiting scientists from Earth's most prestigious research institutions. "We reimagine." The primary research team represented a cross-section of human potential that would have been impossible to predict just decades earlier. Rachel Gonzalez, a quantum systems engineer with a background in evolutionary biology, stood beside him. Her neural interface allowed her to process complex technological schemas faster than most supercomputers could calculate. Their current project defied everything known about technological development. What had once been a Zylaxian energy distribution module was now transforming into something entirely unprecedented. The technology seemed to breathe under their touch, its molecular structure shifting and adapting in ways that challenged fundamental understanding of physics. "Look at this," Rachel said, manipulating a holographic representation of the energy conduit. Molecular structures danced and reconfigured, showing possibilities that most scientific models would have deemed impossible. The fundamental breakthrough was not in creating more powerful technology, but in understanding technology as a living, adaptive system. Each piece of equipment was viewed as a potential platform for continuous transformation, not just a static tool to be used and discarded. A young engineer named Michael Chen approached with a new prototype that looked deceptively simple. What appeared to be a basic communication device was actually a complex adaptive system capable of modifying its own fundamental communication protocols in real time. Traditional scanning technologies would find it nearly impossible to track or understand. "We're creating technology that thinks," Rachel explained. "Not just artificial intelligence, but adaptive intelligence that can fundamentally change its own operational parameters based on environmental conditions." The visiting scientists watched in stunned silence. This wasn't just technological innovation. It was a complete reimagining of what technology could be. Daniel's team had already produced prototypes that would revolutionize multiple scientific disciplines. A medical adaptation module could restructure its own nanoscale components to address unknown biological threats. A communication system could generate entirely new linguistic protocols on the fly, making traditional cryptography look like child's play. "Our advantage isn't in having the most advanced technology," Daniel told his team during a strategy meeting. "Our advantage is our ability to see beyond the technology itself. We don't just solve problems. We redefine what a solution can look like." The captured Zylaxian technologies underwent a complete metamorphosis. Energy systems that once required massive infrastructure were condensed into compact adaptive units. Communication technologies that relied on complex biological interfaces were reimagined as flexible, programmable systems that could interface with virtually any known and unknown. Communication method. Rachel demonstrated a prototype that could interface with alien communication networks by essentially learning and mimicking communication protocols in real time. It wasn't just translation. It was a complete linguistic and technological adaptation that happened faster than the original system could detect a change. They're looking for a specific type of technological signature, she explained. We're creating something that doesn't have a signature. We're becoming invisible by being infinitely adaptable. The philosophical implications were as profound as the technological ones. This approach to technology represented a fundamental shift in understanding. Technology was no longer a tool to be wielded, but a living ecosystem to be nurtured and understood. By the end of the week, Daniel's team had not just studied the alien technologies, they had completely transformed them into something entirely new. Prototypes that would have taken other civilizations decades to develop were being refined and tested within days. "Welcome to human innovation," Daniel said with a smile that was equal parts scientific excitement and strategic calculation. "We don't just adapt. We evolve." The war was won long before the first shot was fired. Emily Watkins understood this fundamental truth with a clarity that made her both a marvel and a nightmare to military strategists. Her office in the deep research complex of Epsilon 9 looked more like an artist's studio than a strategic command center. Walls covered with intricate networks of information, holographic displays showing complex sociological patterns that shifted and breathed like living organisms. "Conflict is a language," she often told her team, "and we're going to become its most fluent speakers." The Xylaxian civilization was not just a military power. It was a complex sociological system that had refined conquest into an art form. They didn't just defeat civilizations. They systematically dismantled their cultural and psychological foundations. What they didn't realize was that humans had been studying this exact methodology for generations. Emily's team represented the pinnacle of human psychological research. Anthropologists worked alongside neuroscientists. Linguists collaborated with cultural historians, and data analysts created comprehensive models that could predict societal responses with uncanny accuracy. They weren't just analyzing the Xylaxian society. They were preparing to rewrite its fundamental narrative. The first phase of their psychological campaign began with information dissemination. Not propaganda, but something far more nuanced. Carefully crafted communication streams that would penetrate the Xylaxian communication networks, introducing subtle cognitive dissonances that would gradually erode their collective confidence. Marcus Rodriguez, a specialist in xenolinguistics, had developed communication algorithms that could exploit the most minute linguistic and cultural vulnerabilities. "Every civilization has fault lines," he explained. "We're going to find theirs and turn them into chasms." They started with the Xylaxian communication networks. Where most would attempt to disrupt or destroy these networks, Emily's team did something far more sophisticated. They began to introduce microscopic variations in communication patterns, so subtle that they would initially go unnoticed, but would gradually create increasing levels of internal uncertainty. Financial records were subtly manipulated. Historical archives received microscopic revisions that would create just enough cognitive dissonance to make Xylaxian historians question their own historical narratives. Communication protocols were infected with linguistic viruses that would slowly reshape how information was processed and understood. "We're not destroying their society," Emily told her team. "We're giving them the tools to question their own foundations." The psychological warfare went far deeper than simple misinformation. They identified the core cultural myths that held the Xylaxian society together. Stories of technological superiority, narratives of peaceful conquest, beliefs about their own evolutionary trajectory. And then they began to gently, systematically deconstruct these narratives. Intelligence reports began to show the first signs of success. Xylaxian military units started experiencing unprecedented levels of internal communication breakdown. Strategic planning sessions became increasingly fractured. The collective confidence that had made them seemingly invincible began to develop microscopic cracks. Sarah Chen, working alongside Emily, developed communication infiltration protocols that were works of art. Each message was a carefully constructed puzzle that would cause Xylaxian analysts to spend exponential amounts of time trying to understand its true meaning. By the time they realized there might be no deeper meaning, they would have already been psychologically redirected. Humans have always been storytellers. Emily would explain during strategy meetings. Our greatest weapon is our ability to understand the narrative beneath the narrative. The most brilliant aspect of their approach was its subtlety. They weren't attempting to destroy the Xylaxian civilization. They were helping it deconstruct itself. Every intervention was designed to make the Xylaxians believe that the changes were coming from within their own systems. Political leaders found themselves questioning long-held beliefs. Military strategists began to doubt strategies that had worked for generations. Cultural historians started to see fractures in narratives they had previously considered immutable. By the time the Xylaxian leadership realized what was happening, the psychological foundation of their civilization had already been fundamentally transformed. They hadn't been conquered, they had been invited to see themselves differently. Emily Watkins watched the complex data streams, a hint of a smile playing across her lips. Psychological warfare was an art form, and humanity had just become its master practitioners. The real battle was never about weapons.